Hello, everybody. Welcome to my talk, Climbing to the Top of the Lighthouse with Scully. In this talk, I will show you some tips and tricks I've learned to reach this goal. But first, who am I? My name is Robert. I'm a Berlin-based front-end developer. I love to go to conferences, and I'm also co-organizer of ng. But now to my talk. It all started in March 2020. I was excited because my first flight ever to New York stood before, and the next stop planned was ng-conf. But then my flight was cancelled, and ng-conf had to move online because the first Corona lockdown started. So I had way more time than I wanted. By thinking about ng-girls, I got more and more concerned about our ng-girls website. It became slower and slower and harder to maintain. Luckily, I heard about this new cool tool called Scully. I said to myself, let's give it a try. So I decided with a little team of volunteers, rewrite our website and move it finally to the Angular stack. Our goals were it should have a top Lighthouse. It should be also more responsive like today. And it should be still interactive. So it means some JavaScript should be still active. And it should be also high performant. And here the journey began. But before I will tell you our story, here a few basics about Scully and Lighthouse to make sure we have the same knowledge. What is Scully? Scully is a static site generator based on the Jam stack. It makes it possible to pre-render Angular applications based on their route. It makes it also easy to store additional data and markdown files to extend our Angular application. And it has a very easy to use plugin system. So, how Scully works. Scully analyzes all routes of our Angular application. For example, here it detects the base route, which should show the app component. And with the help of the app component and a headless browser, the view will be generated to static HTML. In the second scenario, we have a workshops route, which should deliver routes from the workshops module, and this lazy load. In the Scully configuration, this route is connected to the markdown folder called workshops. With the parameter workshop ID, connect the corresponding markdown file which has the same name. In the markdown file, we defined a line and a paragraph, which has the content of our website. And then, again, with the help of a headless browser and Scully, is rendered to a HTML file with the name ng-conf.html. Next, what is Lighthouse? Lighthouse was built as a tool to help developers to create progressive web apps. But later it turns out that it is also a cool tool to build better web. This is how Lighthouse is used today by Google. Lighthouse analyzes a web application under 5 categories: performance, best practices, accessibility, SEO, search engine optimization, and PWA, progressive web apps. Maybe some of you are already at the race to meet the core web vitals, which will be new KPIs of Google to rank web applications. You can run Lighthouse on different platforms. For example, here with npm, you can run Lighthouse on the command line. If you need to test it immediately during development, you have either the choice to use it directly in your browser DevTools under the tab Lighthouse, where you can also choose the category and if it should be mobile or desktop. or you use an online service like Web Dev or PageSpeed Insight. PageSpeed Insights also combines lab and field data for the Lighthouse check. Means it adds additional data from the real world to your Lighthouse report. But about one thing, you need to be always aware. Change is a constant. Lighthouse continuously updates its mechanism. So it's not enough to reach once a high score. It's a continuous process of improving by each version because new checks need to be fixed. Let me share with you a few learnings. First of all, I suggest you run Lighthouse on different platforms. For example, the DevTools and PageSpeed sites. It might give you a different feedback on things to optimize. Also, try to run your application on more than one hosting provider to reach the best result and a way to compare strategies. If you run Scully in the DevTools, go into the incognito mode. Close also heavy applications like Netflix or G Suite because they will affect the Lighthouse score. And maybe close also other windows if they affect your Lighthouse. Also, try to run Lighthouse tests multiple times and take the average of the result because sometimes you get a random slow result because of bad internet connection. And as I also learned, Lighthouse will be fastest at midnight. I don't know why. I tried different providers. For example, here in my case, it's Azure Static Web Apps and Join Now. Both gave me always a slightly different result and suggestion for optimization. But also running Lighthouse tests at different time gave me different results. Azure had its best results at night, but try not to reach a result once. Try to reach it constantly. Let's start with my tips about improving the Lighthouse score. First, follow the instructions given by Lighthouse. Actually, I could now stop my talk here. Just kidding. For a few of you who already use Lighthouse, it might sometimes feel like in this picture. But let me say to you, Lighthouse is your friend. Lighthouse should help you. Let's start with improving the low-hanging fruits on our website. You might get easy tips for accessibility, like changing your color to improve the contrast ratio of colors. It means that background and foreground color should have a high contrast. So you just need to play around with the colors as described to get a valid color setting. Also take this tips about headings serious, which asks you to use headline in the right order. And also don't forget the alt attribute. Your user will be thankful and the score is it. For some routes, you don't need JavaScript. So simply deactivate it with this npm plugin in the Scully conf. Another low-hanging fruit is to lazy load image, but just for those who should not be visible in the first view. This reduces the images count, your Lighthouse. For fonts, reduce your set of icon fonts, or better put the icon fonts as inline as. So you don't need to load another font because they are heavy. Also take care about the normal font. Reduce them to the minimum needed. Maybe you don't need another font. Maybe just use the needed characters with the text parameter for Google Fonts, like shown here. And avoid caching old fonts in your service work. Use the WOF2 format. But just if you don't need to support the Internet Explorer. Find out if you need to support the Internet Explorer or not. Please analyze your statistics. There are different tools to generate also WOF2 format for icon font, like Icomoon, but sadly just in the paid version, Montello, or cloudconvert.com, and a few more. If it's enough for you to use the WOF2 format, go to your font definition in your SAS file and comment everything except the usage of WOF and WOF2 out. And don't forget to check the font display swap, that your text still stays visible during the web font load. Next simple advice is to update your libraries and frameworks. They will provide you smaller bundles, and you avoid security issues which affect also the Lighthouse. And they help you with accessibility and search engine optimization tricks. Images were a big optimization point. First tip is to use the WebP format. It reduces, for example, for me, the images up to 95%. You can use for this the Squoosh app to convert your images. Also, CDNs like Cloudflare will make this for you. WordPress also supports now WebP and will soon support converting it. But use WebP just if you don't need to support the Internet Explorer. If you made sure that your user mostly use the latest macOS version. Otherwise, you need to provide fallbacks. I recommend, instead of using CSS background images, use the image or picture tag with the responsive attribute, providing you the same functionality. They are easier to make responsive. They also reduce the CSS recalculation, and they avoid CSS code duplicate. You also have better control about the sizes of your images, which helps you to avoid content layout shift. I got in my Lighthouse score a lot issues because of proper size, missing height and width attribute of my image. Depending on render critical or non-render critical images, there are different things I suggest. For render critical images, like here the background image of our stage, I created a reusable component with a defined width and height, and a set of different breakpoints. Here you can use the magic of Angular and pipes for a better control of your source URL. And don't forget to define the alt attribute. For non-critical images, like for example the workshop card component, which are outside of the initial view, use a similar component like before, but with less variance of images. The reason here is because later the service worker will cache all images and each image count. But for those small images, you just need one or two sizes. And don't forget to define lazy loading for your images. And in some cases, it's the best to use flexible inline SVG, which will be rendered by Scully to the static content. So no extra request. Next optimization point for me was the largest contentful paint, LCP. The LCP is the largest content element in the viewport becoming visible. In my case, it was the logo. In the later process, I changed it from WebP to an inline SVG to use LCP work. But I did also more. To optimize for better server response times, we used Scully for pre-rendering. Scully will render out of our Angular application view static HTML file. Later, when static HTML file is loaded at the client, Scully come into play and start the Angular app. Because of this, we need to use this transfer. To avoid the flickering, when Scully loads, we can take the observable data from the cache instead of requesting them when we serve the app. For this, we ask if Scully is already generated. And we also cached assets. If your provider doesn't support it by default, you can set expiring headers in your access. I highly recommend to use service work to serve the assets client side. Here you can use the tool Workbox to make it easier to create your service work. We can define different caching strategies. For example, here we cache SVG and WebP, cache name image, which should have maximum 30 entries. And you can also use a CDN. I haven't used it in my project. To optimize source load times, you can enable in your htaccess file the gzip compression for text files for different assets. Very important is to use the render blocking JavaScript and CSS. To reduce CSS that is render blocking, Angular already helps us with CSS minification and inline criticism. But you also need to do something like reducing CSS at all and deferring non-critical, like shown here. Non-critical CSS is preloaded on the load event. Critical CSS is loaded directly. To optimize render blocking JavaScript, we can split JavaScript into bundles. We can concatenate important JavaScript files, and we can also use bundle analyzation. And we can use our SAS files right. Bundle splitting is set up very easy. Also, concatenation just needs a script. For analyzing bundles, we also have different tools like directly in the Lighthouse report, or the Webpack bundle analyzer looks like this. Try to refactor duplicated code. Remove unused dependencies or replace them with smaller ones. And split bigger modules into smaller. Santosh gave a cool article about this SAS issue if we don't use our SAS right. If we don't remove unused code in the ports, we will run in code duplication. Our JavaScript bundles, like I had here 12 times, which was criticized by Lighthouse. I imported multiple times a SAS module which defines multiple breakpoint mixins, but also other stuff. Like here in this file. I just used it for one mixin. If I change it to the needed smaller mixin files, I saved each time 10 kilobytes and at all around 100 kilobytes. Other things I've learned by optimizing for Lighthouse is that it is also good to have a good cookie consent banner which can influence the Lighthouse score because it avoids loading unneeded resources initially. Last tip, learn and explore yourself. And finally, I reached in browser DevTools for desktop and mobile a full 100 score with the fancy animation. This fancy animation. Let's see it here as a saved report because I can't run it live because of video recordings. So you see here the Lighthouse report with the different scores and metrics. And you see there's still some stuff to do, but it is already at the 100 point. And also mobile, which was really, really hard. And at the last, here you find the demo of our application. And here you find the slides. Thanks.
Hey, it's Joe Eames with ng-conf. If you like that video, be sure to click subscribe either here or here, somewhere over here. And if you're looking for something more, here's another video for you to watch here or there or somewhere.